Okay, good morning, everybody. How's everyone doing? I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think it's 9 o'clock. And hopefully everybody can hear me. Okay, I think this may have been a different Zoom link than what I used last time. And I was looking over the announcement that I had posted on the main screen, and it looked like it said microeconomics. And so I wonder if I picked up the link to my micro course as opposed to this one here last time. So I apologize for that. But as you log into the system every day, just for class, just make sure you're picking up the right link, and especially if you're watching live, intend to watch live like you are today, a lot of you, to make sure you've got the right one. So anyway, I apologize if that was by error, although I could have sworn I went into the right one on Tuesday when I did that, but I suppose I'm fallible as well, even though Brightspace does have an annoying tendency to do strange things. So we're going to get started. I want to just, as I tend to want to do, just give you a bit of a briefing as to where we are. We're pretty much right on track with where we ought to be for the based upon the schedule and the syllabus. We're going to cover the rest of chapter 2 today. And chapter 2, well, chapters 1 and 2 both, and I think I mentioned this, as well as the chapter or the appendix A. Not every topic is going to be covered. Not every topic is going to be covered in the order in which they're presented there. I'm sort of presenting what I think are some of the highlights of things that you ought to know probably going forward in economics, so that you can do better in the course as we progress. And so some of these will be, I'm sort of weaving in and out of both chapters, but kind of bear with me as we do that. Okay. Sorry about that. I had to sneeze there a minute. So anyway, we'll cover the rest of it. Oh, and by the way, like things like factors of production, which is where we left off on Tuesday, and I'll finish up here very shortly. I don't believe it's covered in the first 2 chapters. In fact, I'm not sure if it's covered. Just in my reading of the text, I don't recall that it's really discussed anywhere in the book, but it's pretty fundamental to introductory economics. And so I'll cover the rest of that today. I put a little question mark by chapter 3. I don't know that we're going to get to chapter 3, but if we do, that just puts us a little bit further along in the game as we approach the first exam, which is coming up 2 weeks from today. Next week, we will definitely get into chapter 3. It deals with demand and supply, and that really gets us into sort of the heart of what we're talking about in economics, economic modeling, and the study of individual markets. From there, we will have covered, after those first 3 chapters, really all the content that would be similar to that which you might study in a micro course or any other, I think, probably econ course, introductory at the introductory level. A lot of these are very common topics. Beginning in chapter 6, though, we transition, we sort of break away from those common elements to go our own way with macro. And so chapter 6 really gets us into an introductory piece dealing with macro, and it'll be all macro all the time from there. The beginning of week 4 on that Tuesday, we'll cover the rest of chapter 6, what we don't get through. Then I'll make some time to review for the exam. Our first exam is scheduled for the end of week 4, which is 2 weeks from today. And I think exam 1, which is the end of week 4, I think what I'll do on this is I'll have a regular class session. So anybody who wants to come in and take the exam can do that. I've also made the option available to take this online. And what I'll probably do is I'll make this exam available right at the beginning of class session online. That is 9 a.m. on that Thursday. You can either come in and take it here in class in room 415 at Max Salazar, or I suspect a lot of people will take it online. And you'll have it until the end of the day, Sunday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, in order to take it. Okay. And the time limit, I think, is going to be 1 hour and 15 minutes as the regular class session is. So you'll be able to do that. Yeah, and you want to do that in one class, in one sitting. I know that in some exams, in some online settings, you can stop and start, leave, go run to the store, come back, whatever. You won't be able to do that here. You want to do it all in one sitting. So make sure you're comfortable, have a Coke or a cup of coffee or whatever. Get comfortable so you can sort of settle in to take the exam. It'll be an open book proposition, obviously, because there's no way to sort of police that in an online setting. which means as well, if you're going to do it here, you can bring your laptop or whatever you like, because obviously you can log into the textbook in order to view that, and any other kind of resource, your course notes, the PowerPoint slides. Let me talk about the PowerPoints here in a minute, and any other kind of resource that you might want to access. Okay, so that'll be available, and so for those taking it online, it'll be available through the weekend. Or if you prefer to take it in person, and because I realize not everybody has got as reliable of internet access as perhaps would be ideal, you can take it at one of the testing centers, either main campus. Main campus would be preferable, just because I'm here and I can easily, in a very moment's notice, deliver it there physically, but also Montoya or West Side campuses. And that may be give me about a day delay lag there. I have to probably interoffice that, send it to our interoffice mail to get it there. And South Valley I could probably also deliver, because I live there. So anyway, so any questions about the schedule? It's well, nothing new. We're right on track with where we ought to be. I do always say that the schedule is sort of tentative. I do my best though to try to stick with the schedule, just because if we get out of whack, it does throw people, throws people out of their rhythm and whatnot. I think it's best to know what's coming, what we're doing, where you are, and particularly if you're behind, you'd want to know what you need to do in order to get back and caught up. And as I mentioned, the first day of class, econ's probably not the best class to get behind in. Not that there's any class that is good to get behind in, but it just seems like it's a little hard to sort of digest econ, maybe like the night before the exam. I think that's hard. Okay, so let me go ahead and erase that. I do want to talk about those PowerPoint slides, and again, I want to reemphasize that I know that people tend to have the idea those are really important pieces, when they really are sort of to sort of help guide the discussion, the class discussion. I'm having some trouble communicating with distance learning. I don't know. We're kind of emailing us back and forth, and it's beginning to be to the point where it's not really even making any sense why we're not communicating. But I'm going to hit, as soon as our class is over here, I'm going to go to what's called a Zoom room, where I'm going to hit them and say, look, just go take a look, and I'm going to have them shadow me and figure this out, because I was reluctant to post week 2's slides. They're done. They've been available forever. But if they're coming in as double vision, and what, I don't understand why it's happening, first of all, but let's try to get it fixed, and then we'll get it up there, and so you can have that available. But I'm going to hit them on their Zoom room live, because I just don't think they're understanding what I'm saying. And in fact, I've never seen it before either, so I couldn't tell you what's happening. So, okay, so are there questions for me? Looks like we've got a fair number of students coming in live today, so that's good. I will try to post this for those of you who are watching the recording. Hopefully this will be up tonight. It usually takes me, I think I mentioned before, I would love to be able to make this available right after the class is over. However, the file's got to be compressed and processed, and there's a class that comes in right after mine. In fact, usually it's as I'm still talking, people are rushing in for the next class. So I just don't have time to do it because it's being saved on this computer. So it'll be sometime tonight, and it'll be available and for you to work with. Also, one thing I should have mentioned on the exam on 2 weeks from today, if you want to come just ask questions, and sometimes it's beneficial just to talk with your instructor one-on-one, particularly if you've got 4 or 5 things and you don't want to put in an email and whatnot. And I kind of prefer that, actually, because I know sometimes people will send me an email with 7 or 8 different topics, and that's fine. I'll address as many topics as you want. I mean, I guess within reason, but sometimes I'm not always sure that I get to every point. So it may make sense to do a face-to-face thing. And so even if you want to just come on that Thursday and just to sit down and talk, and we may have others taking the exam, we may not, I don't know. And then you say, okay, I'll go home and take it. That's fine. You can do that as well. I'm available to you. I just given the fact that we don't have a great attendance in person, a lot of it's due to the weather and the time of day maybe, and COVID I think is a big discouraging factor. I doubt there will be a rush of 30 people in the room, so it won't be any problem at all to do that. If you come on campus, remember to fill out the campus questionnaire, and you would say daily health questionnaire. It's very short. Also, the school does require you to be vaccinated or have a weekly test for COVID. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with the rest of chapter 2, or the material, which I think is introductory to that. And we talked, and where we ended up last time, well, that pins over here, is it? With talking about input factors, and also known as factors of production. Input factors or factors of production. And I just sort of listed these and didn't really get into these very much last time at all. Input factors or factors of production. I bring up the term factors of production because I think if you were to Google this, factors of production would be probably more productive in terms of giving you the list of 4, which are very commonly held throughout economics, and they're land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Land, labor, capital, entrepreneurial ability. I mentioned on Tuesday that for the longest, and these are very, very old school terms, as I mentioned Tuesday, but I also mentioned on Tuesday that the first 3 have been around since the very, very beginning of economic analysis. Economics as any kind of a discipline, and they sort of meant different things then than what they do now. But there are still sort of the rudimentary ideas of how we can form an understanding of input factors. And input factors are important because what goes on in inputs oftentimes makes their way to outputs, which in macroeconomics, we tend to focus a lot on outputs. We use the term output again and again and again. So land, labor, capital were the first 3 that were originally conceived of by the early thinkers like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, those kinds of folks. And so I think what we'll do is we'll sort of focus on these. And as I recall from last time, we had just sort of sketched the outlines of what these are. And so let's get into these today. Focus a little bit more on what these are all about. Okay, so when we talk about land, we mentioned last time that land is not just land as land itself, that is raw land, but rather we're saying land as natural resources. In other words, when we talk about land as an input factor, and remember that very rudimentary sort of flow chart that I drew on the board Tuesday, where you have all these little inputs out there. And the job of the producer is to sort of corral these inputs, whether it's labor, materials, energy, whatever, even knowledge and training, and bring them all together, run them through the hopper of the production process, and then out the other end comes some good or service. And again, the term good will be used as a euphemism for goods and services. We will see, particularly as we sort of tear into the national income accounts, where what that different makeup is between goods and services. But again, when we use the term goods, we're implying that it's services. So among all the inputs that are being brought to bear on the production process, natural resources, we have the benefit of those just because of by virtue of our being on the same planet with them. And so as a result, we've got an abundance of natural resources for us to use. And in fact, I know that there are oftentimes concerns that we're sort of running out of natural resources. I have heard this a lot. I particularly heard a lot of this when I lived on the East Coast, because, and I think if you live there, you would sort of get the impression at times that we're running out of natural resources. But a drive across the country would tell you that we're not really that short of timber or coal or a lot of these sorts of things that it might suggest that we're running out of. But nonetheless, conserving those is often important. But let's talk about what some of the examples of these are. Now, by the way, there is a shift that has happened, and anthropologists will talk about the shift that has gone on over time, over a very, very, very long time period, thousands of years, where humans were able to corral wildlife, certain forms of wildlife, and be able to use it, dominate it, control it, essentially make it a sort of a human thing of management. So for instance, when we talk about things like animals, right? Natural resources, animals at some point became livestock. Now it's a small fraction of the animal kingdom that humans have been able to corral and to control and to breed and to consume and to make it really our own. It's a very small percentage, but nonetheless, it's very important. And that migration from animals to livestock is a very important aspect of it. By the same token, there are a certain plant life which had made its way to become growing crops. small fraction of the plants on the planet were able to be cultivated to become growing crops. And so as a result of this, these are natural resources. And again, a small fraction of the plants are able to become growing crops. Okay, so, and that's an important element of how we became the civilization that we are, beginning a very, very long time ago. Okay, and then urbanization and all that, which flowed from that. But anyway, this is not an anthro course. I do want to talk about the importance of natural resources because it does come up again and again, particularly as it relates to things like oil, which we'll simply categorize under the broader category of minerals. People always want to bring up oil, and it is very important. I just looked at the price of oil today, and it's up again yet today. And there's probably no secret to anybody who drives a car or fills their tank up or puts any amount of gas in their car. The price of oil has been rising, as has the price of a lot of other minerals like gold and silver, a lot of it having to do with the inflation of the day. And we are going to be talking about inflation in this course. We were seeing an inflationary trend in the economy in the last year, and we'll have to see what the policy response is going to be in order to deal with that. It does seem like the government may be a bit behind the curve on that. There's a wait and see attitude, which I think is, among many economists, is probably a bit too prolonged, but we're going to have to sort of deal with it because we're seeing the rise in so many prices. But I do want to emphasize, though, that I know there's a tendency to look at a particular good and see the rise in the price of that good, and thereby causes one to extrapolate, hey, there must be inflation going on because gasoline is now $3.25 a gallon or whatever, where it was $2.50, 6 months ago or whatever. Well, that may or may not be the case because we've seen, particularly in the case of oil, it's a very volatile commodity. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, and it goes down. A lot of it has to do more with the supply side than with demand side or with the overall macro picture. It really does. And we've seen spikes and dips repeatedly, and we're probably going to keep on seeing them. So we have to be a little bit careful to, even I sort of violated what I earlier, what I just did now, when I talked about the price of gasoline. But the price of gasoline does, in this case, seem to be riding along with the trend in overall prices. But I do want to caution everybody not to look at a particular good, whether it's the price of milk or the price of gasoline, and immediately think that that one good is responsible for all inflation. So minerals, not just oil, not just natural gas, but also things like coal and copper and iron and all those other minerals that go into the process to make goods. So minerals can go into also things like timber, and timber can be used to make a lot of different things, paper products, lumber for construction or remodeling. So there's a lot of things that go into that. Timber as a natural resource, is a growing crop that has lots and lots of uses. Even the pulp itself has uses. And there are all kinds of other examples as well. And I might say as well, because I think as an important input, as a natural input, I think that we should also talk about and particularly in this part of the country, where we're seeing things like solar energy, which is becoming a more important, actually, let me just say solar and /wind, solar and wind, because both of these are prominent in this part of the country, particularly wind, as we know that we're a fairly windy part of the country. And, but these are both sources of power to be used as, well, energy to be used as an input into most production processes. I can't think of any producer that doesn't use some form of power. It seems to me incomprehensible. Electricity is the most basic form of natural resource, really, even more than things like water and whatnot. But we will include water. So solar, wind, and I guess I should have probably included hydro, right? Hydropower, and that is water power, even though water is not particularly abundant in this part of the country. It does exist in a lot of other places as well. So I want to make sure I keep my lines straight here. So sorry about that. I kind of put that in as an afterthought. And I'm sure there are other ones as well that we could talk about. But those are some of the examples of natural resources. So we talk about land. We're not talking about land as land per se. We're talking about land in the form of natural resources. Okay. All right. So questions about that particular item. All right, well, we mentioned last time, I think we said that labor was not just simply labor in the form of people showing up for work, that instead a more modern understanding of labor is that of understanding labor as being human capital. I think this is an important thing for us to understand, the idea that labor is not just firms employing people to do things and having them show up and do things, but rather hiring people to bring their knowledge and skills and whatnot. So when we talk about some examples of this, we're talking about things like skills, first of all. And there's really no point in hiring people who can't really do anything, right? And I know even the most unskilled of jobs requires some sort of skill in order to be able to function, whether it's communication skills or interpersonal skills, whatever. Some jobs have more requirements of that, some don't, obviously, but there has to be some sort of skill in order to be employed. And the more skills that a person brings to the table, in fact, the more of all of this element of human capital that people bring to the production process, the greater their wages can be, because the more productive they are and the higher their wages. And by the way, let me sort of back up here a step, because when we talk about human capital, and then we've got a third category called capital, it looks like we need to maybe step back and say, well, what in the world is capital if it's human capital here as a separate item under number 2, then what is number 3 all about? Well, let's back up a bit and talk about what capital is and give a definition of capital, because this is one term that's used a lot, right? And we hear it a lot. It's used in a lot of different contexts, and even within a college or university setting, we hear it in a lot of different disciplines: finance, accounting, even a lot of other areas as well. So when we talk about capital, what we're really talking about is can we arrive at some catch-all definition that will encapsulate all uses of capital, so that when we get more specific and talk about human capital and this form of physical capital here, we can hone in on it, but yet we know what the term capital means. What capital basically would be defined as anything which we built upon to produce future value. Anything which can be built upon to produce future value. I think that's probably as good a definition of capital as there is. I know that Karl Marx wrote a couple of big, huge, gigantic volumes on the idea of capital, and with all its different elaborations and whatnot. So I realize that one can go and talk a lot about capital, but nevertheless, just to sort of give us a starting point for understanding what capital is, anything which can be built upon to produce future value. So the example I often use, this is a fortunate time of the year for those of us who are watching football. Now that the postseason has begun, we oftentimes see a football game where one team fumbles the ball, the other team recovers it, yet can't do anything with that recovery, even though they might have a good field position. So the announcers will invariably say that the team failed to capitalize. In other words, failed to provide future value based upon what they already had. So it's building upon what one has in order to produce future value. And the idea of capital builds upon itself. And so our very system, which is known as capitalism, is the idea of building and building and building upon what is already there in order to produce future value. And the evidence of capitalism's ability to produce tremendous amounts of value is all around us. I mean, even the most rudimentary of economic measurements going back, 100, 150 years, even though as imprecise as it is, it cannot fail to impress one that there's been a tremendous explosion in the amount of economic output since the very founding of the United States. And a lot of it having to do with industrialization and with the idea of producers being able to harness inputs productively in order to build and produce lots and lots of output, which a lot of us can enjoy. And I think as an economic historian, one of the things that I have long marveled at is the fact that the Industrial Revolution, which began around 200 years ago, slowly, gradually, in various parts of the world, mostly in the Western Europe and into the United States, really was sort of a transformative event in humanity, because it sort of allowed people to enjoy some of the benefits of technology, longer life expectancy, better nutrition, all that, happier lives, I think, by and large. Which is not to say that capitalism is perfect, it's far from it, but nonetheless, I think that There's no doubt about the evidence of that as being measurable and observable. Okay, so that's the definition of capital. But let's return to human capital, because human capital is one aspect of capital itself. And so people bring to their workforce not just skills, but one big one here, and that's experience. And this is really a biggie. You can put a little star by this, I think, because when we talk about experience, we're talking about things which really have to simply be gained over time. It really can't be taught. It really can't be trained on. And that is the idea that you simply have to have been there and done that. And there's just really no way around it. The experience, though, is problematic from the job seeker standpoint, however, because you'll very often see ads for jobs being posted where an employer will say experience necessary, or 5 years experience, or whatever. And it's because employers understand that experience is something that people bring that with them. They don't have to go through the same experiences again. They already have the knowledge about how to deal with a particular kind of issue. The thing about experience is this: you just really can't get it in the book, and you can't even train for everything that might come up. You can try, but you might not see everything, and so as a result, experience really matters a lot. It's the whole idea to put the entire task, the whole job in context based upon what has come before it. So there's really no way to train for it. I know my mom was in the legal profession for a lot of years, and when she retired, she was really the only one in her firm that did very much in the way of estate planning, probate work, that sort of thing. That is, people planning for their deaths and their estates being passed along to heirs. And her law partners didn't really do much work in that, but sort of inherited her clients, and would very often call her to say, we don't really know what to do about this. Can you give us an idea of where to file this, how to argue this, that sort of thing? Where do we look to do this? They just didn't have the experience. Didn't mean they didn't have the right background, just didn't. What they were lacking was experience. Can't be taught. So, but education. So, having said all this, we do mention education as something which may not be able to provide experience, but does provide a good foundation. And by the way, education, which is what we're all engaged in at the moment, has been responsible, incontrovertibly been responsible for an increase in wages for everybody who goes on to earn college degrees. And the higher the college degree, the higher the degree of lifetime earnings. And it's not even debatable. In fact, there's a piece in your text that talks about this as to what the average wage should be for somebody with a bachelor's degree, somebody with no bachelor's degree, somebody with a master's, etc. I don't think they go into the doctoral breakdown, but you kind of get the idea that education does translate to higher lifetime earnings, which is why a lot of people choose to pursue education, even though it may be more general than specific in some cases. True, there are a lot of academic disciplines and majors that are very specific to the particular job that one is being trained for. Nursing comes to mind, engineering comes to mind, law, any kind of like criminal justice, those all sort of come to mind as being very job specific. But there are many that aren't really job specific. And if you're an English major, which my wife is an English major and who works in a job that wouldn't have nothing to do with literature or whatnot. But her employer, like a lot of employers, valued her education because of the fact that it makes you broader as a person. And if it didn't mean that, then why would employers pay up for that? One of the things that we are noticing that there's a trend where employers sometimes are sort of reaching out of where the traditional hiring would be and recruiting would be, and not necessarily looking for people with an accounting degree necessarily, or a finance degree, but maybe looking for somebody with something in maybe a more unique place like arts or whatever. They oftentimes do very well in unrelated areas, but they do bring a bit of background to the picture. Okay, so education is one that is more formal. One that is less formal, although it could be formal, I suppose, depending upon the setting, is training, which is job specific. So while education may or may not be job specific, training is very definitely job specific. And if somebody knows how to do a particular thing, like drive an 18-wheeler and whatnot, then they wouldn't need to be trained necessarily how to do that, or trained in how to write right, code in Java or Python or whatever. They've already been trained. They know how to do that, whether they've trained themselves or whether they've trained elsewhere. And obviously 18-wheelers, truck drivers have to, I think, go through a formal training process now because there's the licensing is more stringent than what it used to be. But nonetheless, training is job specific. And so that is what people bring to the table. It's human capital. And the more training, skills, experience, and all that, the better. And I'm sure there's some other elements of human capital that go into this, but those are the ones that essentially translate into higher productivity. And the more that one has of all of these things, experience and training and whatnot, the more productive they are and the more valuable they are to employers. And the more valuable you are to an employer, the higher your wage ought to be. And by the way, we're going to talk incessantly in this class about workers and wages and what happens when workers feel like they're not being compensated for their higher wages. Being compensated for compensated with higher wages for the experience and the training that they have, that they will find jobs elsewhere. In other words, in the parlance of economists, we say they demand higher wages. Now, how that works is they tend not to go in and bang on the table with their boss and say, hey, we need a higher wage. They'll simply go elsewhere. They'll simply go elsewhere if they're not being compensated for that. And we are seeing, I think, quite a lot of that happening right now. I know that some of you may have heard the term of art called the Great Resignation, where people are leaving jobs a lot. Yeah. A lot of it. Pardon? I don't know that somebody's talking to us. If you've got your, try to mute your mic if you would, please. But if you do want to join the class, feel free to do that as well. But the Great Resignation is simply sort of a news media term for people leaving their jobs and maybe going back to work, maybe not. There does seem to be a trend toward early retirement for people who are able to retire. I suspect it's due to health issues or health concerns over COVID, because it does tend to afflict older people than younger ones, for sure. So I think a lot of people are concerned about that. And if they're able to retire, we do seem to see that happening. But I would suspect that if ever COVID becomes in our rearview mirror, and I don't see when that's going to happen, but if it ever does, I think people will probably come out of retirement to come back in to the workforce. Also, the stock market has done extremely well the last few years, and so a lot of people probably are just saying, let's just go ahead and retire. But also, for those people who are not necessarily retiring, I think it's fairly easy to get a job right now, I think. I know my wife's company is hiring people. They just can't hire enough people. The economy is actually doing very, very well. We'll talk about where the economy is headed. I've got some of my own views on that, just having been around the block once or twice. But right now, the economy is doing well, and people feel very confident to leave jobs and find ones elsewhere. And I think that's a pretty good thing for workers, actually, which has meant that they have been able to dial up their wages. We have higher minimum wages certainly here in this part of the country than the federal minimum, and I would suspect that to be the norm for the foreseeable future. Okay, so any questions about labor as human capital, not just people showing up but actually having more things that they can do and more interesting backgrounds. All right, well, we talk about capital, human capital. What is the capital we're referring to here? And again, I keep saying this, but I just want to reiterate that these are sort of old terms. But the term capital, when it was first being discussed in economic thinking, really referred to physical productive capital. Physical productive capital. That's really what that meant. Physical productive capital. Physical productive goods as inputs. Remember, okay. And so we're talking here essentially about things like machinery and equipment. So non-human inputs, in other words. And today, with a higher tech economy, even the term physical is a bit. It's like the term physical flow in the circular flow model. It's a little bit misleading because of the fact that the physical nature of it may be in some doubt, actually. Particularly as it involves things like software, which is really not very physical at all. Whatever physical evidence of a software program is only incidental. It's the intellectual property that makes the most sense. But nonetheless, we oftentimes tend to include it in capital because it doesn't really go anywhere else. It's a product of human labor, but so with any machinery. But it's the input, the capital input into it to the production process, which is important that we can build upon to produce future value. So machinery and equipment. What's the difference between the two? Well, as I understand it, machinery has moving parts, equipment tends not to. So that would be one example there. Also, this is a very, very large category, technology in general, which I realize that is not an easy topic. There are entire academic schools within universities called schools of technology, that's even separate from engineering, where all kinds of technologies that exist, whether it be computing technology, information, there's schools of informatics, so information technology, networking, biotechnology, which is a huge area right now of research that is finding better solutions to healthcare issues, a lot of them dealing with things like nanotechnology, genetic engineering, those sorts of things. So it's a very, very broad field, I get that. But we're talking about very, very broad categories here as well. And so I think it's important for us to realize that we could get very, very specific, but then we would sort of lose a bit of the focus of where we're trying to come from. So machinery, equipment, technology, and we'll sort of wrap this particular topic up by just simply saying intellectual property, which again, doesn't really have a physical aspect, I get that. But it is becoming, but it certainly is an element of something that can be used upon to produce future value. Why isn't that part of human capital? Well, one issue is this. First of all, human capital tends to sort of go away once the people who are providing the skills, education, experience are no longer working at a particular place or no longer alive even, whereas intellectual property can live on and on and on and on. And it's building upon that thinking, that research, that understanding, those discoveries, those findings, which have been done years and years prior, that allow us to go forward from there. So this is why it would be considered capital productive. It's a productive sort of input. And here we're talking about inputs in the production process. Okay. So machinery, equipment, and a lot of times we'll be talking about, there's a particular element of spending in the economy. When we look at the demand side of the economy, that's who's doing all the buying of things. I mean, I know it looks like we're coming from the supply aspect of the economy here, and we are, but there's got to be a demand side as well. And so when we talk about that, we'll talk about the fact that it's primarily businesses that are the consumers of this particular input, as really is this input here, because this really is the sort of a supply view of the economy. And there's a particular category for this in the national income accounts, those are the official accounts kept by the US government and all modern governments that track that particular spending. And there's some characteristics of that which lead us to be able to make observations about where the economy is going, what are the trends, what might be happening in the future. And oftentimes we, as economists, we want to know what's happening, okay? Or where things are going. The final category here is the newest of these. Some would probably argue it really belongs under number 2 for human because it's all based upon human capital. But entrepreneurial ability is basically defined as, I think I gave you this on Tuesday, it's the willingness and ability to assume risk. The willingness and ability to assume risk. And we're going to sort of modify the word risk here and say business risk. As opposed to other kinds of risk like financial risk, like if I buy stock in a new startup of a company that makes electric vehicles, for instance, that would be a fairly risky endeavor. And I guess that would be my own business to do that, but it's not me starting a business, offering, corralling inputs and offering outputs for sale. All I'm doing is buying stock in a company that produces a new electric vehicle. And so it's business risk, it's this ability and willingness. That's got to be both together, the willingness and ability to assume business risk. This is among the newest, well, it is the newest of the 4 categories of factors of production. And I suspect the reason why this was included sometime late 20th century, after a couple hundred years of not being part of it, is because of sort of a recognition that there is some sort of X factor that we ought to be aware of. That it's one thing to be able to bring all these together, but it's another to have the imagination to produce something that nobody has ever thought of before, and to be able to risk everything to do it. And a lot of times when we think of the term entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial ability, we'll think of actual entrepreneurs as certain individuals who sort of stand out and come to light. People like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Henry Ford and Jeff Bezos, people who created basically new ways of thinking about products in general. If you think about Bill Gates and this whole idea of willingness to take risk, Bill Gates left Harvard, arguably the finest university in America, in order to start a software company in an industry that really didn't exist, because even in those days, in the early to mid 70s, really before Microsoft got going, software was really considered to be sort of just a means to make the hardware go. In other words, and the first computer people were really hardware people for many years, and when computing got going. And obviously that's a legendary story now about how Microsoft got going and really sort of got the better of IBM, which really didn't know that the value in the computer business is not so much hardware, but software. Software is where the value is. In fact, the value of the software business is much more valuable than the value of the hardware business many times, and it's growing exponentially over time. So, but it was a risky proposition to leave school to start a business in an industry that really didn't exist. Jeff Bezos, who essentially left a career on Wall Street to start Amazon out of his dad's garage, I think it is. And how many businesses starting in garages? Hewlett Packard started in the garage, Apple started in the garage, Amazon, and today Amazon is this behemoth of a company. And a lot of us have, relationships with Amazon. In fact, I was going to buy something the other day. I didn't have time to go to the store to Target, so I just decided I would buy it on Amazon, and you could buy pretty much anything there. Well, that's obviously something that was needed. They filled a demand and ran with it. So this whole idea of thinking outside of the box, to take risks in order to do things, this sort of X factor that is something that is unique and different, and it's even beyond human capital, because it's not even about someone's experience, but it's rather someone's imagination. And one thing that is notable for entrepreneurs themselves is this idea of doing things a little bit differently and being unpredictable, even going against the conventional wisdom. I know that business schools will oftentimes teach people, and even the econ departments will say that most output is produced as a response to demand, that there's a demand for something, so suppliers will supply it. But then you've got someone like Steve Jobs who comes along and says, well, how does anybody know what they want until I make it for them, right? So people don't know that they need an iPad until I make them an iPad or an iPod or an iWatch or an iPhone. So that is not conventional wisdom, but today Apple is the most valuable company in the world, or at least it was as of last week. So you get the idea that it's an X factor that is important, okay? All right, so questions for these. I hope I didn't spend too much time going over this, but I did want to cover what these were all about, and so we have a pretty good understanding of these as we go forward. So I'm going to go and erase this, and I want to move on to some of the other, just to sort of wrap up chapter 2. I think we can get wrapped up here within about the next 32 minutes, something like that. And so we'll set ourselves up for chapter 3. I just didn't know if we'd get to chapter 3 or not. You kind of bear with me. If we don't get there, it's no big deal. We have all next week to do that. So again, we're sort of covering in this introductory piece. We're covering sort of the who, what, when, where, why of economics, just so that we can have an understanding of who the actors are, what they're doing, how they produce output, why they produce output. All those sorts of interesting questions that we're trying to answer. And when we talk about this nature of production of goods, right? Corralling of inputs, producing goods that produce valuable outputs, we have to understand a couple of different things here. And one of these things is this idea of inputs, right? And we talk about inputs go into the production process, right? This is production. And we end up with outputs. So inputs create outputs. Again, this is not a particularly fanciful model. One of the things about inputs is this, that inputs from a financial standpoint create costs, okay? And costs are what we simply refer to as outflows. Outflows of what? Outflows of resources, typically money, but they're always measured in money. And so this is going to be something that we're going to be coming back to again and again, is that we'll have units of output. So we have units of input, units of output, but then there's also a way that we can put a dollar figure on the inputs going into it, and then we simply call them costs. And then the dollar value of outputs, which we will also be able to measure as well. Outputs actually create revenues, right? And we're not really going to talk a lot about revenues per se, but revenues, though, are what we would simply refer to as inflows. Okay. I don't want to talk a lot about the inflow piece of it, but I do want to talk, since we're talking about production and the production of value, I do want to talk about costs here, first of all. And I know that a lot of what goes on in microeconomics, for those who've already taken it before, and I know most of you probably have not, but if you have, there's a lot of discussion of costs and different ways in which we break down costs. For those of you who are accounting majors or plan to be accounting majors, there's really an entire subset of accounting that's known as cost accounting. It sort of fits under the general category of managerial accounting, that is internal accounting, primarily in business firms, but also has an applicability to government accounting as well. The accounting for costs, that is outflows in response to the utilization of inputs in order to do whatever it is that the activity involves, right? So, and we oftentimes will have different ways of breaking down costs. And in this case, and we do a lot more of that in micro, but here we simply want to focus on a couple of different kinds of costs. And the costs that we want to talk about here are what we refer to as explicit costs versus implicit costs. Explicit versus implicit, okay? So, and the term explicit means it's right there, it's in your face, you can see it, it's easy to measure, and it's not hidden, in other words. Not that anyone's trying to hide implicit costs, but implicit costs you've got to sort of dig around for, and you might make some judgments, and it might be a little bit less objective than an explicit cost. When we talk about explicit costs, I think it's probably safe to say that when we're talking about the costs of production, what we're really getting at here is costs which are easily measurable and identifiable. In other words, these are the costs, really this is what we really think about, I think, when we think about costs. What are we talking about here? They're measurable, so we can, there's no sort of extrapolating what our wage costs were for last year, right? If we're a producer, we know what they are, they're measurable, and they're identifiable. We're not going to confuse wage costs with utility spending or spending on postage or advertising. I mean, there's not going to be that sort of ambiguity. It's going to be identifiable and it's going to be measurable. And it's going to be definite. It's going to be definite. And so these sorts of costs are easy to measure. They're explicit. They're right there in front of us, and which is why they're simply known as explicit costs. They're measurable. They're identifiable. Also, they're objective. They're objective, meaning that, let's say that the person who's doing the accounting for these particular costs goes on vacation, and somebody different is putting these numbers together. They ought to be able to arrive at the same numbers, maybe some rounding issues, which are irrelevant, but for the most part, they ought to be able to come up with the same numbers because they're objectively determined. There's no particular personal judgment that says, well, I think this is a wage cost, or I think this is an advertising expense. I mean, I think that these are, these are subject to judgment. No, they're pretty easily understood. So explicit costs differ from uniform, which are implicit costs. So if these are what explicit costs are, then what the heck are implicit costs? Implicit costs are what we would call opportunity costs primarily. Now we should define what that means, because that is not something that we oftentimes hear, although it does come up, from time to time it does come up in a business setting. Opportunity costs are simply this, and it's essentially an economic concept. When I say that it comes up in a business setting, it does, but it often comes up in the context of how do we categorize a cost, and can we say it's an explicit cost? And somebody might say, no, that's an opportunity cost. So therefore it goes somewhere else. And so it would not go into what we would call accounting costs. Explicit costs are, I think, what we would call accounting costs. I think that's probably a good way to look at it. Whereas implicit costs are opportunity costs, which are what? Let's get to the point here. Opportunity costs are the cost of foregone opportunities. The cost of foregone opportunities. Okay, so, and when we're being very, very specific about a particular scenario that we're viewing, an opportunity cost would be very specific to that particular thing, and would only be limited to that. But in general, what we're saying is that nobody can do everything. That people are giving up opportunities to do things, and so it's one measurement of economic value is trying to minimize opportunity costs. It's trying to minimize opportunity costs. That is, if I do one thing, I can't do another thing. So we talk about these examples of people like Bill Gates leaving Harvard. What did he give up by leaving Harvard? He left the opportunity to get a bachelor's degree there, maybe go do something like, work for IBM maybe or something, or work for General Motors and have a good living doing that. Well, he gave that up. Now, obviously, it worked out for him in this particular case, but that was an opportunity that was gone. And we see examples, and the textbook that we used to use before we adopted the open textbook, and really I thought a great article about people who have given up going to college and maybe want to return to it later in order to pursue sports careers, very high-paying sports careers. So Tiger Woods leaves Stanford, an excellent university, in order to become a full-time golfer, which obviously worked out for him. And LeBron James just skipped college altogether to become a superstar in basketball. And you can always go back to college, though. That's sort of the message of that. But you can't always be 20, 22 years old and be able to make millions and millions of dollars a year and be, and really have your future assured at that point. By the way, Shaquille O'Neal, who actually did go to college and became a very big star in basketball, actually went back to college and earned his PhD. So there's always time to do that. So and I'm not trying to act as a spokesperson for colleges in general. I'm just simply saying that there are costs that happen because we forego the opportunity to do certain things. Let me just give you an example here, just to be very, very specific as to what we're talking about. When we give an example of an opportunity cost, that is a value of some foregone opportunity. So let's say that we've got, and let's just take the case of labor, right? Because those are the examples that I just gave you there. And but even though the broader application of opportunity costs isn't limited to just individuals providing labor, it's business firms, it can be entire industries, it can be entire countries. And we'll give an example of entire countries here before we leave. And I don't know that we're going to get to the final bit, which is what I wanted to talk about, which has to do with production possibilities. But if we don't, that'll be the final bit that we'll cover in chapter 2 on Tuesday, and then we'll get into supply and demand at that point. But let's talk about an example here, just as one example of this particular scenario. Let's say we have somebody like a chef, okay? We're seeing chefs everywhere on TV today. So let's say that we've got a chef who is the executive chef at a major hotel in New York City, let's say, and or anywhere, let's say Albuquerque, okay? And let's say the year 2018, this person earns a salary of $150,000, okay, as a chef at a hotel in Albuquerque. Okay, so becomes very popular and earns a good salary, good living, works for somebody else, right? Which is what a salary implies. You work for somebody else at a fixed wage, and so as a result, you decide to go do that, right? Well, in 2019, this chef decides to set out on his own and start his own restaurant, which is very common, where now the salary goes to zero because there's no one paying a salary. But then he makes a profit in the first year of $50,000. So the question is this. Is he better off or is he worse off for having done this? Well, he's given up $150,000, right? So in other words, that foregone opportunity cost needs to be included as a cost here. So if we take these together, so we have salary plus profit, salary is zero, profit is 50,000 minus the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost, and if we put things negatives, we oftentimes put it in parentheses here. He's actually $100,000 worse in order to do that because he has foregone the opportunity to earn the $150,000 just in that year. Now, what about in the year 2020, where his business is now taking off, and so his salary now is still zero, right? Still zero, but now the profit is, say, $250,000. Well, okay, he's $250,000 better off, but he's actually, we have to take that 150 out, and at some point we should probably write this down a little bit because the opportunity cost is not going to be, I mean, that is, he's, not guaranteed at 150 forever necessarily, but now he's actually better off by 100,000, not just the 250, which is what we call explicit profit or accounting profit, but by $100,000, and that is what we would simply refer to as economic profit. Economic profit, whereas the profit here is accounting profit. Accounting profit. I kind of squeezed that in there. I hope that's not too tight. And I guess the good news of having a video is that you can stop and take a look and make sure you've got all that together. So what are we really saying here? We're saying that this person is giving up something, and maybe the first year it didn't quite pay off, which is not terribly unusual. And by the way, to earn a profit the first year of any business would be pretty good anyway. It is the experience. One of the reasons why small businesses, new businesses fail is they just can't get over the first, say, 5 years where there may not be any profit being earned at all, and there are actually losses, which have got to be financed somehow, and it's usually by the owners themselves. And if the owners themselves are willing to keep injecting money, the business can survive. It's probably not going to come from lenders. Banks tend not to like to fund losses, but equity owners, ownership might. Keep in mind that Amazon lost money year after year after year after year, but the owners kept putting money into the company and believing it was a worthwhile bet, and it did, but it took a while to pay off. But in the very short run, huge opportunity costs for everybody involved, including the owners who really weren't making any money at all from it. And so in this case, we have to include the opportunity cost. It's the value of foregone opportunities. Actually, I probably should call this not the cost of foregone opportunities. I probably should call this the value of foregone opportunities. There probably is a better way of viewing that. So the value of foregone opportunities. And when we're being very specific, we're talking about the value of the best foregone opportunity. When we're talking about a very specific example. So for instance, this person who is a chef earning $150,000 a year, maybe in 2019, so what did he forego in order to do this, right? Could he have been a pitcher for the New York Yankees, maybe, and given up a salary of $3 million? I don't know. So, and do we include the $150,000 and $3 million here? I think we need to pick the best alternative. It's probably unlikely that you would be a top chef and a starting pitcher in Major League Baseball. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm saying it probably isn't going to happen. But if it does happen, we'd pick the best, and so it'd be $3 million, not $150. And then we'd be asking what on earth he's doing being a chef in the first place, right? Okay, so the only reason I'm getting into that sort of silly example is because of the fact that when we talk about the value of foregone opportunities, we're really talking about what is the best opportunity that's being foregone. Okay, it's the best opportunity. All right, so questions about that particular example there. I apologize for sometimes leaving the screen and looking over it, just the way that the room is laid out. I try to see if anybody's putting something in the chat box or whatever. You can feel free to communicate with me in class. There's a chat function. I may not see it right away, but I'll certainly get to it. If I don't get to it, when I overlook it, I'll get back to you individually. And again, you can always get with me individually as well if you like. Okay. So questions about inputs, outputs, and the costs of doing things. That it's bigger than simply explicit costs. It's also implicit costs. And I know, having come from a financial background, that there are cases in which some costs are not easy to arrive at. And people will say, well, that's an opportunity cost. Let's not include that. So the final bit of this that I want to talk about is this idea that these tend to be subjective. These tend to be subjective, and that further, and it may not be the case that we arrive at the same value of something. And just as an example here, this may be a little bit more objective, this particular example, than some of the other cases in which you might run across as examples. But what about something like you take a business firm, for instance, and the business firm is producing 5 different brands of coffee and decides it wants to drop one of the brands because it costs a lot to produce. It's got a very small market share. It doesn't seem to be growing. Maybe it's an outdated, worn out brand, and so let's retire it. Well, there's probably some profit that's still being earned off of it. So that particular value has got to be included as a cost if it's foregone. So if you decide to stop making a particular brand that's got particular resonance, then you have to understand that whatever profit that would come from that is now gone. And in microeconomics, we do get into this idea of branding a lot, and the fact that, and if you take a marketing course, for those of you who like marketing, who like branding and whatnot, you'll get all that you want of that in a much more detailed way. I am not a marketing person at all, but I can tell you that there are brands that are out there that the makers are sometimes wondering, do we want to continue selling this particular brand? I'm thinking of my father-in-law who smoked a brand of cigarettes called Chesterfields. I don't even, he's been gone for about 20 years now, so I don't even know if they make Chesterfield cigarettes. They probably do, but it was a very hard to find brand because it was a really, really old brand name. They were non-filter cigarettes. You know, I know that my mother-in-law would have to, you know, try to dig them out. So if they were on vacation somewhere, forget it. He'd have to take cartons with him because you just couldn't find it. Well, whoever made Chesterfield cigarettes, I have no idea what tobacco company did. Must have been thinking at some point this brand is going to go away, but people are still buying it. So we have to make the determination: do we continue to offer it, or whatever we're earning off of it, or do we jettison it, knowing that we're going to give up, we're going to create an opportunity cost of a foregone alternative? Okay, so these decisions are all around us at the individual level, at the business firm level, and at the industry level, even where some industries decide they may or may not want to be involved in a particular activity. So the industry is deciding it wants to go away. I'm thinking about certain industries like certain industries which make things like typewriters and sewing machines. It's interesting. I don't know if I mentioned in this class or it was another class that one of my relatives was trying to find a sewing machine, wanted to do a little work and couldn't find one. They were hard to find, and I happened to run across one on sale at Costco. So I picked up the phone and said, "Hey, they have sewing machines at Costco. You just don't really see them that much." Walmart may have them. I know Walmart's got a section for that, but it was once the case where people did a lot more sewing at home than what they do now, but it's not that much of a thing anymore. And nor are things like typewriters, certainly. I would actually like to have a typewriter just because sometimes I just want to type something given my terrible handwriting, but you know, it's been replaced by other technology, obviously. So, okay. All right, so any questions about anything we've talked about with regard to opportunity costs? Well, I said that with the example of typewriters and sewing machines, that sometimes industries themselves decide to focus on certain things and to focus less, or to walk away from doing things. But the same can be said for countries themselves. And so there's an example here that I want to go over which deals with nations and the production of output. You know, it's got particular relevance to macro, also to micro as well, for those of you who are also taking microeconomics. But this is an example that's been used for time and again that basically creates the production of two different goods. And we're going to say that two particular goods are wool and wine. And we're going to take two different countries and compare their outputs one to the other. And we're going to see who should focus on doing what and why. Okay, so this is wool. Looks like if you need an example by poor handwriting, that was one example there. So wool and wine in France and the United States. And we're going to say, let's take the total output that's produced, let's say per day, for instance. Let's say that wool will be in the form of 1,000 tons or tons of wool or whatnot. Let's say France can produce 5 tons per day, and the United States can produce 20 tons of wool per day. That might not be the actual production, but it's the example that we're just trying to make a point here rather than to try to get specific. Whereas wine, France does a lot of wine, so maybe they produce 10 barrels of wine per day, whereas the United States might produce 20. In other words, in both cases, what we can say is this: that the United States is able to produce more wool and more wine. And so as a result, in both cases, the United States has what's called an absolute advantage. An absolute advantage. And the term absolute advantage, and you can read about that a bit more in your book, and there are all kinds of examples that you can find elsewhere, and I can certainly provide those too. That is the idea that the US is able to produce more wool and more wine, because the definition of absolute advantage is very simple. It's the ability to produce more goods cheaper, faster, better than some other producer. Now, in this case, it's not really a fair fight because the US is so much larger than France is. So it would be natural for us to assume that the US would produce more wool than France would, and even to be able to produce more wine than France would, even though France is sort of known for its wine production. nonetheless, there is so the US has an absolute advantage, but that's not the end of the story, because when it comes to focus and specialization, which is really what the Industrial Revolution has taught us, even going all the way back to some of the very earliest writings in economics by Adam Smith in 1776. It's the idea of doing what you do best and avoiding what you do and avoiding what you do less well. So in this case, if you consider the fact that the United States produces 4 times as much wool as France, but produces only twice as much wine, then what can we say about this? We can say that the United States has a comparative advantage in wool. So the US has what we call a comparative advantage in wool. And by comparison, it means that it can produce 4 times as much wool as France, but only twice as much wine as France. So it has what we would call a comparative advantage. So as a result, the US would be better off focusing more on wool than on wine. Whereas France is only, they're 4 times less productive in wool than they are. They're only half as productive with regard to wine. So as a result, France has a comparative advantage in wine. So comparative advantage is basically avoiding what you do less well. So France should probably produce less wool and more wine. The US should produce more wool and less wine. That's really what's going on here, is the idea of avoiding what you do less well. And this goes to the idea of specialization, which is really at the very heart of what we're talking about in economics. And that is the idea of doing what you do best and avoiding what you do less well. You may not be the best at doing anything at all, but what you should do is avoid that which you do less well. And I think that's an important aspect, because it has to do with opportunity cost. You're only giving up what you do less well. So you're doing, even though you may not be the best at anything. And by the way, we have this annoying tendency to view those who are prominent producers or whatever as being either you're the best or you're nothing, really. And that's really a very an unfortunate way of viewing things, because there can only be one best at everything, right? I mean, there really can be. And so no one is the best at, and in fact, I'm not even sure who you would say the best economist in the world is. I think that's subject to lots of debate. I'm sure I'm not on that list, but this is not the only thing I do for a living either. So, but you get the idea. I avoid that which I do less well. So when I came out of college, when I came out of high school, for instance, I thought maybe one day I'd play professional baseball. I was a pretty good baseball player. As I got into college, I discovered I was okay, but I wasn't that good. And so I decided maybe I should finish college and maybe go to graduate school and do something like that, like go into finance, which is what I did. So I avoided that which I did less well, that is to try to play baseball. Now, maybe that would have worked out differently had I applied myself in that direction, but I don't think so. I don't think so. So in this case, France is only, they should stay away from wool production because they're not as productive, but they should focus on wine production. Because given the resources, given the labor, the natural resources, the experience, all that sort of thing, they're better off doing that particular thing. This has all kinds of arms and legs that go everywhere when it comes to the focus and specialization and outputs, particularly as it relates to international trade. And that is, countries do what they do best and avoid what they do less well. So Japan really doesn't have much oil producing capability. Number one, they really lack that as a natural resource. That doesn't mean that they can't go offshore to drill for oil, but they've tended not to focus on oil. They would rather import oil and focus on other things like the production of electronics and entertainment and all those sorts of things. They would rather high-tech outputs as opposed to the more commoditized good like oil, right? So they tend to do that. Also, food production. They don't grow anywhere near enough food, produce enough food to feed its population. So they would rather trade for that, import that, not produce as much of that, and trade for other things. And we see this all the time with economies. And by the way, this has implications for development economics as well. And that is the idea. In fact, Paul Krugman won a Nobel Prize for talking about this idea of development economics. And that is, even the poorest countries in the world must be able to do something well. And if they can focus on that and trade it for somebody else, and even if it's at a lower price, well, that's a way to get your foot in the door even though it may be at a lower price, that's a way to gain advantage by being able to produce something, even if it's labor power. And by the way, there are lots and lots of countries in the world that really don't have much in the way of natural resources, but are simply using their labor to produce resources, maybe better, cheaper, faster. And labor power certainly is an input that will allow countries to specialize. And I know that there has been a lot of criticism of international trade, the idea that perhaps poorer countries are being exploited. And I'm not saying that has never happened. I'm sure it does happen, no question about it. But there's also lots of objective evidence that says that a lot of developing countries that were once considered very poor countries have, through specialization, become industrialized countries, and the list goes on and on. The Philippines, Singapore, South Korea, Ireland. These were once New Zealand. These were all countries that, at the end of World War II and the Great Depression, were considered poor countries, and yet today are considered to be fairly prosperous countries. Now we're seeing countries in the Middle East, like the United Arab Emirates, etc., being very prosperous countries, mostly through focus and specialization on what they do best and avoiding what they do less well. Okay. All right. So, any questions about that? Because we will get into the international bit a little bit as we get going into class. I'm going to go ahead and erase this a little bit here, because what I want to focus on the very last topic, and it looks like I will defer the discussion of production possibilities, which is the very last model before we get into supply and demand until Tuesday. That's no problem. We have, I think, plenty of time in order to deal with what we intend to cover. But I want to focus on a topic which is very closely related to comparative advantage, and that is efficiency. Okay, it's the idea of efficiency. I want to focus on what efficiency is all about. I know we've all heard the term before, and I think we all have a general understanding of what it is. And that idea is, we're not going to contradict your basic understanding of what efficiency is. All we're really simply going to do here is sort of elaborate a bit on what's going on with efficiency. There are really two types, and this is going to be a pretty good segue into where we're going to go first thing Tuesday. And that is, the two types of efficiency that we're going to be talking about in econ are, number one, productive efficiency. And productive efficiency simply refers to the ability to utilize inputs, right? And to utilize them productively. In other words, it's the full use of productive inputs. The full productive use of input, or the full use of productive inputs. Here my wording mistaken. The full use of productive inputs. In other words, in avoiding slack or unused resources, whether it's labor, whether it's capital goods, whether it's machinery, whether it's physical plants and all that, which, by the way, we didn't include this under land, but we could have included structures as well, that sort of thing. So full use of productive inputs. In other words, there's no, from a macro perspective, we would call the non-full use unemployment. So we're talking about full employment, okay? That's productive efficiency. It's not slack. It's not idle resources sitting there, because idle resources tend to generate costs nonetheless. Even if you have a plant that is not producing output because of whatever reason, maybe a lack of demand, falling demand for the good or whatever, you've still got to, ensure that, pay taxes on it, probably have somebody to, watch over it, maintain it, if there's a water leak or whatever. So there still is cost being generated. So that's an unproductive use of it. And sometimes there is no avoiding it, but nonetheless, that is not particularly efficient. And we're looking for efficiencies in economics. That's where growth comes from. The second of these is what's called allocative efficiency. This will be the last thing that we get to today. Allocative efficiency is producing the goods that society wants. Okay, producing the goods which society wants. And I think your text referred to this as what the demand side wants. Well, it's really the same thing, only we're going to sort of talk about society here, because I think it's got, remember, econ is a social science, and so we'll say wants or demands. Remember, when we talked about demand, we said that it's really more about wants than needs. So it's producing the goods which society wants or demands. And that is, do the producers produce that which the society needs, wants, demands, right? Particularly wants and demands. Or are producers spinning the wheels producing things which are not desired? And the most stark example of cases of inefficiency, allocated inefficiency, comes from something that's discussed very early on in your textbook, and that is command economies, which simply are managed economies by central governments, which say that we're going to produce 50,000 cars this year and 2.5 million bottles of shampoo, and there's not going to be any sort of variation on this. And furthermore, this is the plan for 5 years. It's locked in stone. So producers aren't responsive to the demand side. They're simply responding to some pre-planned idea of what the economy, what a society should demand. Allocated efficiency is producing those goods which society wants or demands. So rather than a command economy that produces only black cars, four-door sedans, black cars, that's it, no choice. Can't get a white car, can't get a convertible, it's gotta be that. You know, there are producers who will produce white cars and convertibles and whatnot, because that's what society wants or demands. Or rather than producing only junk food, maybe the society produces things like vegetables and whatnot, things which society wants or demands. Okay, so allocated efficiency really has to do with more of the variety and suppliers being responsive to the demand side. Productive efficiency really has to do with being able to use inputs productively to produce the maximum amount of outputs. And that is a good segue to where we're going to pick up on Tuesday. I'm sorry I kept you about a minute late here, 45 seconds late at this point, looks like. So are there questions for me about anything before we turn off the switch for today's class session? Okay, well, if you do have questions, feel free to get with me. I'm available all day today and all over the weekend as well. So if I don't speak to you between now and Tuesday, have a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.